All right, lesson three, day two, right? Remember lesson three, we were getting into subtraction of integers, and we were saying that we could just subtract the values if we understood it, but sometimes it gets a little bit confusing, especially like when we're subtracting a negative. So we practiced writing it as an addition problem and then using our integer rules, right? Which remember that's attached to your agenda for today. And so we can use these rules here, right? If it's the same sign, we add the values together and then leave the sign the same. And if the signs are opposite, we can subtract the bigger number minus the smaller number and then just leave it the sign of whatever value was bigger. So let's start with some practice here. In example A on page 216, we start with 6 minus 12, right? And some of you might go to your interactive number line, which again, that's attached to the agenda as well. And you might go to 6 and say you're subtracting 12 and count 12 over, and that's fine. But let's also look at applying our integer rules. So I'm going to go here, I'm going to leave that as 6. I'm going to change that to addition, and then I'm going to take this value and do the opposite of 12, which would be negative 12. So now that I have it as an addition problem, I can see that it's a negative and a positive value, so I'm going to subtract them. 12 minus 6 is 6. And then since 12 is a bigger value and it's negative, my answer will result in a negative. B, right? I'm going to go leave as negative 20, change to addition, and then I'm going to go opposite of positive 15, which is negative 15, right? And just a reminder, we should be doing these without our calculators. All of these integer problems we should be doing in our head, applying the rules. Do not depend on using your calculator. So here we have negative 20 and negative 15, right? Same sign, so I can add them, get 35. Since they're both negative, it will stay negative 35. C, right? We're going to leave as negative 22. We're going to change that to addition, and we're going to go opposite of 26, which is negative. Whoa. Oh, still working on that pen there. Should be good by chapter 6 or 7. All right, so we said leave as negative 22, change to addition, opposite would be negative 26. All right, and again, they're the same sign. They're both negative, so it'll result in a negative. If I add 22 to 26, I get 48. Now, scroll down here to page 217, and I want you to work on D, E, and F, right? We'll do D together just to refresh, right? Subtracting a negative, right? We talked about bank accounts, right? If I have a bank account and it has a charge, right, it shows up as a negative, right? A withdrawal shows up as a negative. And if they take that negative charge away, my bank account actually goes back up. So looking here, I'm going to go leave. I'm going to change it to addition. And I'm going to make this the opposite of negative 12, which is positive 12. So we end up with 4 plus 12. You should know that that is 16. So pause the video here and see if you can do example E and F. All right, let's see how you did there. In E, should have left it as negative 15, changed it to addition. Opposite of negative 5 is positive 5. So here we have a negative 15, right? So think about the number line. We're at negative 15, and we're adding 5 to that. So we'd go to the right 5. We should end up at a negative 10, right? Or our rule says, since they're opposite signs, I subtract. 15 minus 5 is 10. The 15 is a larger value, so it carries the negative. Here we have leave as 18, change to addition. The opposite of negative 6 is plus 6. 18 plus 6 should give us 24. All right. Continuing on in lesson 3, we're going to look at some variable problems. And it's going to tell us to evaluate, right? And as you move through your classes in math, you'll see this term evaluate quite often, right? And the word that's embedded in there is value, meaning when I see an evaluate problem, I should know that I should get a value as my end answer, right? I should have a value, a number solution to that. So let's look at how to evaluate. It says evaluate the expression if A equals 5, B equals -8, and C equals -9. So I have these expressions down here with variables in them, but then it tells me what the variables are equal to. So I'm going to substitute them in to the variable and then solve the problem. So what I want to do is I want to put the variable in parentheses. All right. And then when I evaluate, I'm just going to replace that parenthesis with what is equal to. So here I have something minus 10. And if I go up here to what B is equal to, it's equal to a -8. Okay, notice parentheses, not to be confused with absolute value. So since it's a subtraction problem, I want to change that to addition. So I'm going to leave this one as -8. I'm going to change it to addition. And then opposite of 10 is -10. So -8 plus -10, I know they're the same sign, so I'll add those values and get 18. Since they're both negative, I leave it as -18. Now in H, we have two variables, right? So I'm going to put it just around the letters, right? So I have A minus B. And do it just around the variable so that you don't get your signs mixed up in there. Now I'm going to insert what they're equal to. So A is 5, so I'm going to replace that with a 5. And B is -8. So subtraction, I want to change it to addition, right? We go leave, change, opposite. So leave this as 5, change it to addition, and then opposite of -8 would be +8. So 5 plus 8 will give me 13. All right, take a minute, pause the video, and see if you can substitute in, right, where we use parentheses around each variable, substitute in those values and solve. I'll see you back in a minute. All right, so substituting in, right, C was -9 and A was 5. So we're going to go leave as -9, change to addition, right? And I like to change it up here too, just so I can see what this value actually is. It's 5. It should change to the opposite, which is -5. So leave, change to addition. Opposite of that second term is -5. So we end up with -9. Oh, I already wrote that. Back up. All right, so -9 plus -5, right? Same sign, so I add those values, get 14. Value stays negative. All right, let's scroll down to example 7 on page 218. And it talks about the temperatures on the moon, right? It says it varies from -173 degrees to 27 degrees. And it wants me to find the difference between the maximum and the minimum temperatures, right? So difference meaning subtract, right? We're going to subtract these values, but we have to be careful. A lot of times what you'll see is just subtracting the 173 and the 127. But when we want to find the difference between the numbers, let's think about what it looks like on the number line, right? And if this is 0 and negative 173 is over here and 127 is somewhere over here, right? So they're on separate sides. So if we think about what is the difference between those, right? I can see that if I'm at negative 173, I have to travel 173 degrees. Oh, that was terrible. I have to travel 173 degrees just to get to 0. Plus, from 0, I got to get up to 127, right? And I can see that the difference between them is 173 plus 127, right? And you might be thinking, well, that's a subtraction problem. Why did we add those values together, right? And remember, when we change a subtraction problem, we change it into addition. So let's look here. If I say the difference between the maximum and the minimum. So the maximum temperature was 127, and I want to find the difference between the minimum, which was negative 173, right? And they're doing that right here as well. Not sure why I'm writing it again, but I want you to see that when we change it to addition, we leave it as 127. We change this to addition, and the opposite of negative 173 is positive 173. So we end up adding those values together, right? So if they're on separate sides of 0 on our number line, to find the difference between them, we have to add those values together. All right, and we'll look at some more examples. I know that wasn't the greatest there. And I did want to talk about Jay. A funny story from back when I was first getting out on my own and had my debit card, and I thought this was unbelievable that banks did this. But it says Brenda had a balance of negative $52 in her bank account, and her bank charged her a fee of $10 for having that negative balance. And that is unbelievable, but banks do that. I remember having a debit card for the first time and went out and, I just figured if I ran out of money, it would stop working. But no, it kept working. And after I got my bank statement, they charged me more for not having enough money in there, which didn't make sense to me at the time. But to this day, I still do not use a debit card for fear of going into the negative balance. All right, so poor Brenda and Mr. Terpstra have had this happen. So she had a balance of negative 52 in her account, and then the bank charged her a fee of $10 for having that negative balance. What's her new balance, right? So we're going to add this fee of negative $10, right? So now she has a negative balance of $62 in her account, right? So be careful of that. If you ever get a debit card, make sure you know how much is in there before you go spending. All right, I wanted to move down to page 219. All right, and this will kind of help us with knowing whether to add the values or just end up subtracting them when you talk about difference between them. So in number 13, it gives me the elevations of some different states where 0 is sea level, right? And then if you have a negative, you're below sea level. Obviously, if you're a positive, you're above, right? If you get too high, they're called mountains. So it says, what is the difference between the highest elevation in Alabama and the lowest elevation in Louisiana? So the highest elevation in Alabama is 2,407. And the lowest elevation in Louisiana is -8, right? So to find the difference, I subtract sorry, there we go. I subtract negative 8, right? And if we think about it on the number line, so here's my elevation of 0. So the lowest elevation here is negative 8. And then way down here, I don't want to run out of room, we have 2407. So, right, to get from this all the way up to this elevation, right, I have to go 8 feet just to get to 0. And then once I get to 0, I still have to climb up 2407, right? So I'm going to end up adding these values. And if you do our rules, right, where we leave this, change it to addition, and opposite of negative 8 is positive 8, we end up adding those values together. And the difference between them should be 2,415 feet. All right. I want you to pause here and see if you can do B through D. B through D. See you back in a minute. All right, let's see how you did there. In B, lowest elevation, New Mexico was 2,842. And then the lowest elevation in California was negative 282. So we go leave, change, opposite. We end up adding those values together and get 3,124 feet. For C, highest elevation in Florida was 345. Lowest elevation California was 282. Leave, change, opposite. We end up adding them together, 627 feet, right? They were on separate sides of 0. And part D, difference between the lowest in Alabama, which was 0, and the lowest in Louisiana was negative 8, and we have a difference of 8 feet. All right, scroll down just a little bit to page 220. I want to talk about a few more advanced evaluate expressions. Had elevation in my head from the last problem. So if I look at number 14, it says negative j, and you can think of that as opposite of j plus h minus k. So when we evaluate, right, I want to put the parentheses only around the variable, right? So if I look at this problem, there's that negative on the outside plus h minus, oh, I didn't want to write k there. I was thinking it in my head and I wrote it. Minus k. So now I'm going to go up and I'm going to insert the values. So for j, I have 4, right, which that negative on the outside ends up being negative 4. For h, I have negative 12. And for k, I have 15. So I'll start by doing negative 4 plus negative 12, right? They're the same sign. So I'm going to add and get 16. Since they're both negative, it'll stay negative 16. And then I have minus 15. So I've combined these two. I'm going to leave that the same. I'm going to change that to addition, and the opposite of 15 is negative 15. So negative 16 plus negative 15. So they're the same sign. I'm going to add. I get 31. Since they're both negative, right, it'll stay negative. Now this incorporates lesson 1, right? Notice those are straight bars. Those are absolute value. So First thing we have to do is insert our value for h, okay, which is negative 12, minus, that should have been parenthesis. All right, we're going to start over here. We're running out of room. Let me get rid of that answer there. All right, let's try that again. So for h minus j, right? So h was negative 12 and j was 4. So we start and we have to do inside the absolute value. So negative 12 minus 4. So I'm going to go leave, change, opposite. So negative 12 and negative 4 would be negative 16. Now I want to apply my absolute value rule, right? Remember, absolute value simply means distance, okay? So I want to make this a positive value. So the absolute value of negative 16 is 16. Notice how I did the operation inside first and then did the absolute value. I don't want to take the absolute value first or change that to a plus first. It ends up working out in this case, but that's not always true. So you got to be careful. You got to do the operation and then evaluate using the absolute value symbol. So your practice for today, I would like you to work on 25 through 30 on page 221. Okay, 25 to 30 on page 221. The answer key for those problems is attached to the agenda, so you can check your work when you're finished. All right, hope you have a great day and talk to you soon.